Hello Pocket Watchers, and welcome to Friday Night Fairytales with me, Gned the Gnome. Now this evening's fairy tale was a request from Rosie. Hello Rosie, and it's called The Elves and the Shoemaker. Now the fairies around here are being very mischievous and keep trying to put me off, so I'll just get on with the story. Once upon a time there was an honest shoemaker called Benjamin who was very poor. Even though he worked hard, he couldn't earn enough money to keep himself and his wife Annie in food and clothes. At last there came a day when he had nothing left except one piece of leather, which was just big enough to make one pair of shoes. By the time he cut out the shapes for the shoes, it was quite late, so he left them on the bench ready to stitch and toddled off to bed. Early the next morning he got out of bed, got dressed and went to his workbench. He discovered that the leather was gone, and in its place was a beautifully made pair of shoes. Well, he picked them up and inspected them, not a stitch out of place. He looked around, but there was no sign of anyone having been there. The shoemaker was confused. "Oh, have I been sleep-cobbling?" he asked Annie, but his wife simply did not know what to make of it. Well, a customer came in and saw the shoes and was so pleased when they fitted him perfectly that he bought them right there and then and paid so much for them that the shoemaker was able to buy more leather, enough for 2 pairs of shoes. Well, that very afternoon he set about cutting them out, and when he finished it was late, so he left the pieces on the bench ready to sew in the morning. But when morning came, the leather was gone, and 2 pairs of beautifully made shoes lay on the bench. It was a real puzzle that Benjamin and Annie could not work out. Well, that day a customer came in and bought both pairs, paying a handsome price that meant they could buy enough leather for 4 pairs of shoes. Once more he cut out the shoes and left them on the bench. As before, the next morning he discovered that all 4 pairs were made. What was going on? Well, it went on like this until the winter, and by then the shoemaker and his wife were really quite prosperous. However, they were concerned. How could they have so much done for them and not know to whom they should be grateful? So one night very close to Christmas, after Benjamin had left the pieces of leather on the bench, he and his wife hid themselves behind a curtain and left a candle in the workshop so they could see what was going on. Just as the clock struck 12, the door opened softly and 2 tiny elves dressed in old raggy clothes came dancing into the room. Well, they hopped onto the bench and began to put the pieces of the shoes together. Oh, they had brought with them tiny scissors, tiny hammers, and needles and thread. They tapped with their hammers and stitched with the needles, and the little elves worked ever so hard. In almost no time at all, the shoes were stitched and finished. Then the little creatures tidied up, hopped off the bench, and left, making sure they closed the door behind them. Well, the shoemaker and his wife looked at each other, and they said, "How can we thank the little elves who have made us so happy and prosperous?" "They only had rags to wear. I should love to make them some beautiful clothes," said Annie. "Well, I will make them some shoes if you will make the clothes," said Benjamin. "It will be a lovely Christmas surprise for them." Well, it was now Christmas Eve, and they started working on this surprise for the elves. Annie cut out 2 tiny coats of green silk, 2 little pairs of trousers in white satin. She knitted 2 pairs of lovely yellow socks and made 2 tiny caps that were red. Benjamin set about making 2 little pairs of shoes with long pointed toes, and the clothes were as fabulous as could be, with tiny stitches and pretty buttons, and those shoes had the most pointy toes that had ever been made. The shoemaker cleared his bench, and instead of leaving leather on there, he laid out the 2 sets of clothes and those shoes. Then he and his wife hid away as before to watch. And at midnight those little elves came in. They hopped up onto the bench to start their work, but instead of the leather, they saw the clothes all laid out. They laughed and they danced for joy as they put on their little coats, trousers, caps, and finally the pointiest shoes in the whole wide world. Oh, they were so happy that they danced and sang until the clock struck 2 when it was time for them to leave the workshop, making sure to close the door behind them just as they always did. And that was the last time they saw the elves. They never came back. From that day, they had given the shoemaker and his wife all of the good luck they needed. The elves' job was done, and so they moved on to find the next person who was in need of their help. Well, that's the end of the story, everyone. I look forward to seeing you again soon. Good night.